Welcome everyone to Moral Mayhem. Hey Vaish.
Hey.
Today we're recording on the couch, so maybe if you're lucky you'll get some pictures of the cats if you're watching.
And of me. I'm
if
kind
you're
of sad
watching
that
the
I
video.
can't be as like grumpy as I usually am because like people can see that. I mean, wouldn't be nice if I don't smile a little bit. Anyway, we have something sort of like lighthearted at the face of it, but I think something that we've both thought a little bit about.
Should I give the
Sure.
observation
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
had? So basically I had this observation that when I think about older people, like my grandparents, boomer generation, they would talk about the other sex. They would complain about the other sex. And obviously there's plenty of cases where, there was true sexism happening in their generation and stuff. But when I hear like people of this generation talk about the sexes now, it tends to be sort of like a very lighthearted observation of like the faults and
just their
strengths.
and their alienness in some
Yeah.
there's a men, you know how they are. They don't like. I think you'll see women say this in the context of how bad men are at picking up like social cues or something like that, right?
Right. But then, in the online world, and for those of you who are less online than we are, you might not have to come across this, but there's just what feels like a ever increasing degree of resentful, hateful discussions about the other sex from both sides. And so the right wing version of this is sort of like the what do you call it? The Alpha Bro podcast, talking about, women are this way. Here's how we can manipulate them. All they want is hypergamy.
All they want is hypergamy. Okay, yeah.
And then from the women's side, it's like, don't sleep with him because he's gonna think of you as a whore, a relationship option.
I thought you would slowly escalate from like object of desire to sex object to whore. You went straight to whore. Okay.
That's
cool.
I mean that's basically it's sort of like this
Not Gordy. Yeah.
No, he can come. He can be seen. This is Gordon. Anyway, if you're listening to audio, he's just annoying us. But basically, I have just been thinking about why is it that the modern incarnation of this feels so much more resentful and so much more negative. And so what we
Yeah.
were thinking is basically that, we questioned the existence of sex differences sort of in, third wave feminism or whatever. And
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I'll actually maybe even rewind a little bit more. Like, and I think this is, it's probably true a couple generations ago in the West. It's still true in more traditional societies. But basically, you have the sex differences are passed down as like, ancestral wisdom or something, right? Like, it's sort of like at least in traditional family structures, you'll see that the women hang out with other women, the men hang out with other men. They're very aware of their differences. Mm-hmm. They're aware that they should treat the other sex differently. Like if a woman were just to like say something to a man that she would say to another woman, the other woman would be like, "What's wrong with you? Do you not understand?" So I think that is sort of like the framework that tradition brings, and then once you start, and of course that's too broad a brush, right? So clearly that has generalizations that are not great. Mm-hmm. But I think in the middle, as you said, with third wave feminism, whatever you want to call it, you possibly overcorrected. And at least our generation grew up thinking, including me, that even thinking in those general terms is anathema to like living a ethical life, right?
At least outside of very like specific areas. Like I would say, I think this is less true for the current generation that's in college, but I would say like at my generation, no one was pretending that men and women didn't have like different sexual interests. Like my mom or whatever would have still been warning me like, men are this way, be careful, and they'll try to, push your boundaries and this kind of thing. So there was some amount of wisdom that was still passed down.
And so what the wisdom actually does point to is, even if it sounds like criticism or generalization, it does involve acceptance for difference. And I think that now, because it's antithetical to our moral system to talk about differences, we also expect no differences. And so I think my thesis of what you're seeing now, and maybe you have a more nuanced take on it because it does sound a little bit simplistic, but it's that when kids who have that starry-eyed vision actually make contact with the opposite sex, they hate what they see because they're expecting to see something like themselves, and that is not what gets thrown back at them. And then the reactionary movement to that is the toxic stuff you're seeing on the online right and on the left, I guess.
Yeah, I think that the way I would characterize it is like moving it from, oh, like they can't help that they're this way, to like they have a moral failing for being this way. So like all men are assholes, or all women are, you know, trying to objectify you for your income, or whatever it is. Versus like, yeah, like the stuff that I'm talking about with the older generation is stuff where it's like, you know, guys going out after the dinner and looking at some car or something, and the women in the kitchen being like, men are so ridiculous, look at them, they're just spending all this time on the car or whatever. Or like, you know, being like, oh, men, they don't know what's going on with our social calendar, they're just totally clueless. If I wasn't here managing their thing. And then on the other side, you know, men being dismissive of women for being frivolous or
emotional
or whatever.
Yeah. And so
just one more thing, which is importantly that on the other side of that, they would also appreciate the things that the other gender is bringing and why they are in a partnership with the other gender. Like, you know, my grandma would always be like, this is why you need a man to carry the thing, or whatever. I mean, these are really simplistic things, but anyway.
Yeah, I guess that's a piece that I didn't think much about, which is that there's acceptance, which also means there's acceptance of the differential value that the opposite sex brings. But so now, before we go on, I wanted to clarify something around what we are saying and what we're not. I think what I'm not saying is that we need to go to some version of this that excuses men or women for violation of ethical obligations.
On the basis
of sex differences. I mean, we can take sex differences into account in formulating what are reasonable ethical constraints to place, right? But those should be pre-negotiated. And so I'm not in favor of saying, you know, we don't want a world in which like it's like, you know, men, they're just cheating. It's like, okay, no, if you think that, then maybe you should negotiate a more, you know, polyish relationship or something. Like you can take that conclusion to its actual ethical constraint, but you can't violate things that you've already agreed.
Right. And also, I mean, I just want to say, like, the reason why, you know, these kind of comments strike the Gen X and millennial generations as like outdated or whatever, is because they don't fit everybody. There's lots of women who wouldn't fit those like boomer things that somebody would say about women, or vice versa. So it's not that I'm definitely not encouraging like unabated generalization. It's just I almost feel like it was I just have a curiosity as to like, is this a pressure release valve when people can kind of like openly point these things out, laugh about them, and women still do this together too, and I'm sure men do too in private and stuff. I just think like the stuff that you see online is sort of like the toxic version of this. And again, like I said, it's this idea that it's a moral failing. So it's not that like men like to have more casual sex because they just have some evolutionary differences which mean that that's more appealing and enjoyable to them. It's like because they're disgusting, you know? And I think there was probably some of that in the previous generations too, but I guess it was just, if you think they're just built that way, there's a different tone to it than if you think like they are choosing to manipulate or be lesser than you in some moral application or something.
Yeah, I guess I think of it like as there's a few levels to it, right? And if you analyze it at only the topmost level, you're going to get something very simplistic. So for example, you have the average like evolved tendencies that men and women have. Then you have something, you know, things that we need to price that in and then figure out, given we want a peaceful society and we have other goals, right? What are the correct ethical constraints or frameworks or relationship arrangements we need. And then you have to come back to your individual level and go, well, given who I am and who my partner is the generic societal thing good for us, or should we negotiate something even more libertarian and sort of like individualistic, right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't know if this is we were like, is this the optimal rate of sexism? I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think that what we've seen is there was like a reactionary thing to deny sex differences or to make it socially unacceptable to bring them up, and that was coming out of a reality where people would openly say, like, should women be able to have positions of power because they get their period? So we can understand why we got here, but trying to force that down everyone's throat when it clearly doesn't accord with reality also leads to other problems, which I think is coming out in these like angry versions of this stuff online, rather than sort of just like almost humorous acceptance of the failings and benefits of relating to somebody of the opposite sex.
Also, you see it's hard to see whether young people are getting an accurate slice of reality. So what I mean by that is, how there's this thing about how in the Nordic countries, like you see even more pronounced differences in like occupational choices between men and women, and the assumption there being the more egalitarian the society, you don't see convergence, you see divergence. But I think there's some version of this that even happens as men and women age, they become more. They tend to actually reflect more of their sort of evolved desires, and I think this is partly because young people are more susceptible to cultural influences that, for example, now you might the average man or the average boy is seeing the world in a slightly different way, because actually the girls there have been socially influenced as well to be less heteronormative or converged than they actually want to. I mean, it's possible that thus people have a inaccurate picture of kind of like what the average of the other group looks like. Does that make sense?
Yes. But I just wanted to say one quick thing on the Nordic stuff, because I haven't read this paper, but I saw this come out recently. Somebody tweeted it and I haven't had a chance to read it. Basically saying that the Nordic paradox, which again is the fact that you see more sort of gendered work patterns in the most gender equal countries, which are the Nordic countries. But apparently when you look at within the Nordic countries over time, as they became more gender equal, people were less gender segregated in jobs, which I don't know if that's just like a global effect or if that changes this at all. But anyway, just something that I need to look into, because I've cited that before and I'm now not sure if it's...
You mean you're not sure what the reason is? I don't...
So basically cross-sectionally versus time series.
Oh, okay.
Show different patterns. So somebody posted the research on the time series version, which was like within Nordic countries, as they became more gender equal,
right,
they didn't become less egalitarian in terms of career options. They became more egalitarian in terms
so it might be that there's some other factor that...
It could be that there's some other country factor. But I still think it's somewhat convincing, because obviously, we're going to see a pattern over time, because the entire world was becoming less gender segregated. So anyway, just a side note, but
and
yeah.
So, one implication of all of this that we think has real life consequences is the way that people approach the dating market and kind of the expectations that one has of finding the optimal partner, if you will, right? And I think that at a very high level, if you are not aware of kind of like what the average wants and needs of the opposite sex are, even if you're far away from the average, you should still, it's still important to statistically intuit how many people are at your part of the distribution, what's the likely market size that you're narrowing your preferences down to.
Yeah, and like going from like the male perspective, right? Like imagine that you and I both happen to like to debate and talk about stuff, but like imagine if you would approach the dating market being like, I won't date any girl who doesn't want to spend hours debating politics, philosophy, and cultural observations. That would be probably that for you to put that filter on would be a lot more extreme than for me to put the same filter on.
Yeah,
right.
true.
So that's an example where it's like somebody like me could reasonably go out and have that as a filter.
And I think the implications of that are not that someone, if you're a guy and you have that preference, it's not that you can't have that preference. It's that, well, then you should know that something's got to give, right? Mm-hmm. So if you might just get lucky, but I think in general, you're going to have to trade something else off to get that thing that's super rare in the opposite sex.
But then what I've noticed with this is like, so people for whatever reason are black-pilled on the fact that there are in fact these sex differences. They don't
What is black-pilled?
Oh, sorry. I guess red-pilled. Sorry, red-pilled.
Okay. Yeah, I know that one.
Black-pilled, just for the listener, is so red-pilled comes from the Matrix originally.
Yeah, no, I know. But tell me the black-pilled. Yeah. Everyone knows what red pill is. Tell me the black pill stuff.
I just explained red pill to someone a few weeks ago, actually. But anyway, you can look up red pill on your own. Black pill is like you've taken the red pill, but now you've realized that there's no hope. Basically, there's no hope of coming out of it.
So like MGTOW would be black pill.
Yes, a MGTOW is like a regular incel could just be red pilled.
Let me show off my online. MGTOW is men go their own way. Look it up if you're interested.
Don't look it up, please. Yeah. Please spare yourself. But yeah, so they become red pilled on sex differences or something. But then it leads to this very like objectifying view of the other sex where it's like, well, I found out that they're actually these terrible creatures that have all these asymmetric preferences versus me. And so I'm going to try to abuse that to the maximum that I'm capable. So the lightest...
So you have two versions, I'm guessing, because it's like if it's the black pilled one that you talked about, it's like, oh, it's so hopeless. Like I don't want to make any compromises with people who are like this. That's the one extreme version. Mm-hmm. And the other version is like, well, they're like that. So let me do what I can to sort of like hack their psychology, which is some of like the more, I think a lot of pickup artistry stuff is not that toxic. It's just a spectrum, right? There's stuff that's not toxic and there's stuff that's extremely toxic.
Well, there's some parts of the pickup artist stuff that's not toxic at all, which is, hey, it feels really scary to hit on someone and be denied because in an evolutionary context, there were like 9 women that you could have had sex with. And if you got denied by one of them, that was a big deal. But now, when you going up to a girl in the grocery store and her saying
if you got denied by one of them, you can still fuck the other 8. Don't lose hope. Is kind of like what the pickup artist.
But also like 4 of the 9 guys are not going to fuck anybody ever. They're just going to go.
Yeah, they're going to die.
Not have babies, and the other guys are going to have anyway. Whatever. So the point that point of pickup artistry is great. I think of like saying to guys, hey, women are less likely to approach you. You're going to have to get over learning how to approach them if you want to have a better chance of success, and just put in the reps. Don't get discouraged, and everything's going to be okay. That's wonderful. Where it gets into negging and this kind of stuff, that is where I basically have a problem with any dating advice that involves not being your authentic self.
It also just doesn't, so for example, I think the reason the first type of advice is good is because for the same reason, exposure therapy actually does work for a vast variety of things. Mm-hmm. When the problem is feeling anxiety or an emotional response that you can override by exposing yourself to that stimulus over and over again. So fear of flying is a good example for which like exposure therapy apparently works, but you have to do it in a very deliberate way.
Didn't work for my mom.
Yeah, it's not that. It's a little bit silly to say just exposure therapy because people fly all the time. It's just that if you work with a therapist, they'll kind of like tell you what to do while you're flying,
and
right?
Even if you still feel scared though, like even if you don't reduce the feeling, like with my mom and flying, she still flies a lot.
Is the fact that the fear is okay,
she's been told enough times, oh, it's actually safe, so I'm going to override that fear response, get on the plane anyway. And
that allows you to, so in the pickup artist context, like, overriding that response of anxiety allows you to just be a normal human being and connect with someone authentically. Now, I don't want to again, I'm not giving dating advice, and I also think people who I just feel like there's a bad cluster where if you say relate or connect authentically, right? My mind initially like it will shut off because the people who say that are like terrible, and their version of relating authentically means like making weird noises in front of women or like doing something super embarrassing and then just like romanticizing it. These, I mean, a shame response is still good. You should still be on your best behavior and a kind of just you should be on your a. You don't have to like do this ridiculous things and like convince yourself that the stakes don't matter at all. It's
Right.
that it's a realistic perspective of no one goal matters that much, but when you're with someone, you can still be present and connect. Authentically, I guess.
Yeah, I just think like all of these things that, people will take some very minor average sex difference and then be like, oh, that's why, if you want to make a man fall in love with you, you have to do these 5 steps. 1, and it's like, I'm like, but you're not going to be happy in the end because you've tricked them into loving you and you're not being, they don't actually know who you are and you don't actually, I truly don't understand what the end goal of these advice
I mean,
is.
I think
like,
that if
don't
it's
you want them
if it's
to
just
like
having
you?
a lot of sex, then
No, but for women, it's not, right?
Yeah,
It's about getting the female dating strategists, which is like the PUA mirror on
Yeah.
the women's side. They're trying to get husbands and stuff, and I'm like, so you're gonna get the husband, and then he's gonna find out that you've been using your feminine energy to pretend you're something. I just don't get it.
Yeah, and I think it's like another reason it's problematic is look, I mean, I think we both like to think of dating markets as just another market, right? Now, like I think the difference between dating market's a lot more like a job market. It's like a lot less like financial markets in the sense that you have a bunch of things that matter. Like individuals are complex, and like sometimes you don't even know what like your preferences are implicit and not like kind of out there, and it's very hard to quantify those preferences as well. And so but it's still a market in that there are things that matter to you more or less, and you're making trade-offs implicitly or explicitly and settling at a price, right? I mean, and that price isn't, there's no one external price that you can view, but that doesn't mean that the market either clears or it doesn't. You either find someone or you don't, and looking at it through that context tells you what's wrong with some of these strategies. So for example, if you're too focused on sort of making yourself seem a different way. I think the one very obvious problem with that is that guess what your attention is not on? Assessing if the other person is a decent person.
Right.
Or, and like actually evaluating them, which is...
And especially when you're young, that's so common, right? Where we're all like, when we're teenagers or something, we're all just looking for validation, and we're more, a lot of the times, more concerned with how much the other person likes you and how good that makes you feel versus like, are they actually
and I think
someone you would want to
like
partner
kind of
with?
like that is where the pickup artistry stuff is not bad, in that the exposure therapy part of it, if it successfully dissociates sort of what someone says about you to internal sort of self-conception, that's good. But I think a lot of this stuff is still a lot of it's internal. So what I realized is I've only read actually one pickup artist book, and it was actually a really good one. I think it was
Never negged me, I swear.
Mark Manson, I think. And he says things that are kind of that your therapist would tell you, but it's hard to do, right? And that's the thing. It's like the more authentic the pickup artist advice, like the more like less concrete you can't do an Andrew Huberman like 5 steps, 15 minutes in the morning do this, 15 minutes in the afternoon do something else, but it's stuff like detach, like try to find things that give you happiness that don't have to do with dating as well. Now if you think that you're doing that to get success in dating, you've already lost, right? But which is what most people do. They're like, I'm going to get hobbies so I can get a girl. But it's like, well, it doesn't work if you're going to get hobbies just to get a girl. Like you have to believe the thing.
Right.
And
no,
so,
and women do give each other this advice too, at least on some of the podcasts I listen to, where they're like, make your life, the life of somebody that's impressive and cool and interesting, and see how it goes from there, which I think is generally good advice. I just wanted to bring up the market clearing thing though, just because in case people missed it, like the idea basically, obviously not a groundbreaking idea or anything, but just that you see a lot of people complaining that they can't find anybody. And I can imagine that it can be very frustrating given like sex ratios be like if you're in a city where the sex ratio is slightly tilted against you, or like there can be a couple of things that can make it harder for you to find a reasonably good match. But what you were saying, just to clarify, is that the dating, there's no fairness here. There's no sense of like what you should or should not be able to get. That's not.
Yeah, I
the
think I
right
told
way
you
to,
an
that's-
analogy yesterday, which like I know it's a really bad one, but I think how bad it is really shows you what there is to say. Which is like, imagine you're buying or you're trying to rent an apart or buy an apartment in New York, right? And you have to do that. Now you can either say, well, New York is shit, I'm gonna move somewhere else. But if you're buying an apartment in New York, and you can spend one day saying, oh, I wish the inventory here looked different, but if your focus in the next couple of months is like complaining about the inventory in New York, you're not going to find anyone.
But
because
by the way,
yes, you have to
everybody-
choose from the inventory in New York. So like you either the market clears or not. The market is as it is. You change your preferences if you want, right? Like you're not going to change a whole swath of women or culture
or you say,
overnight.
I don't want to live in New York, actually.
No, that was the first
Right?
option.
Like
You missed.
that's
yeah.
the what?
No, I said you missed my genius first option, which is like move out of New York.
No, but by the way, every New Yorker does complain about the inventory every single time they get a new apartment. But yes, we eventually settle. And that's such a dirty word with respect to dating. And hopefully you don't have to feel like you're settling. But if settling to you means like changing one of your, objective criteria that only 1% of the population meets, then yes, you might have to settle in the sense that you should drop a couple of those criteria if you want to have a better outcome. And your point is that, like you said, you're not guaranteed to get somebody who's going to meet your bar, in which case if you're looking at the options and you're just like, I think I'm better off being single, that's fine. I think
there's always an incentive to. I think this is true for maybe more things than dating, but especially when it comes to dating, there's a social norm of complaining, right? Which we actually should be careful about extrapolating too much, because we don't really know if like people are actually annoyed with how annoyed are people actually with the dating market versus like how much do they like to say they're annoyed. And the reason for this is if there's a few things. So one, people who are single, it is somewhat comforting to externalize the source of why that's the case, right? Especially when there's a culture, I think, bad culture of pushing people too hard. Oh, why are you still single? Blah, blah, blah. And so people have this sort of at least a basic incentive to come up with a good reason for why they're single and haven't found anyone. So, and like, second, it tends to be something that people who have very little in common otherwise can still talk about. So a group of men can always talk about dating. A group of women can always talk about dating. And so complaining is sort of like a natural, and no one likes bragging about how their dates are going well. Like that
Right.
makes you an asshole. So complaining is the equilibrium. So I don't know, maybe there's something
but
there.
also like it is externalized a lot of, like, there's a reason that people say, oh, I feel really lucky that I met the person.
Oh, it's
I'm
totally
like,
externalized.
you
Yeah.
know, you don't have, until you meet a good person and have a successful relationship, like, you might not have too high of a standard. You might just need to go on more dates. So there's a difficult thing where, like, how do you tell if somebody's just being unrealistic versus they just need to go on more dates? Or and by unrealistic, again, I'm not saying that people should settle on, like, I want an ethical, kind partner. Of course, you shouldn't settle on those things. But, like, if there are things that you can realize, hey, I'm filtering people on this thing. It's not actually required for my long-term
Like height?
happiness.
like
Like height.
you were saying something
or-
interesting on like why filtering on height is like really bad equilibrium, because if everyone filters on height.
Yeah. No, I was talking about this with a couple of people on the weekend, and we were talking about. So I was recently on Alex Kashuta's podcast, which we'll link below. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. But one of the things, because I said something about, remove the height filter if you could, and she was like, "That's true," but, like, she was explaining to me, because I've never been on the apps, sort of like from her perspective, why women use the height filter so frequently, which is that they're bombarded by so many matches that they're like, well, I might as well, whatever legible things that I can click on here and filter based on, I'm going to click on here and filter based on, just to
So it's like even if women are technically
real life would be fine with it.
dating someone who was 5'9", they met at a bar
Yes.
on a dating app, they have an incentive to filter on this. And this is something that I wrote about with respect to recruiting
Yes.
last week, which is that the same thing happens with employers screening resumes. Like they will screen for things that obviously help them lower
Reduce the
reduce
pile
the
of
pile, reduce the
applications,
size of the
yeah.
pile. And unfortunately, the only legible things. And so you can actually end up with a suboptimal decision at the end of the process if those filters are too harsh. Now, it's even... let's leave the recruiting thing aside because there's more complications there. And the dating thing, what you said is totally makes sense, is if most women on average prefer taller men than shorter men. I think this is true, right? So most women do. There are hardly any women who have the opposite preference. And height is one of the things you can clearly see and filter on dating apps. So you have this thing where men who meet that threshold are just way more in demand than their actual objective mate value makes them in demand.
Exactly.
Right?
So yeah, so which I didn't think of when I was talking to Alex, but then when I was talking to people this weekend, they brought that up, and just the fact that basically, let's say every woman is filtering for 6 foot tall, and whatever, 15% of the population or 10% of the population is 6 foot tall. So they're getting like almost all the matches. You're still getting lots of matches as a woman just because of the sex ratios on the apps and the fact that men are more willing to reach out more and match more easily and all of that. So you're still getting matches. So you're like, well, I'm still getting matches. However, the guys you're matching with are talking to so many girls themselves because...
I mean, there are two types of men.
Because
there are either men who are
all these
talking to a bunch
matches
of men, a bunch of women and fucking around, but more, maybe even more
No, but I'm
concerning...
just saying they're getting tons of matches on the app anyway. So either they're going to go on a good date with one of those girls and they're going to be off the app soon, or they're what you were just saying.
Yeah, which is they're damaged in some other way that some other woman has found out after
Right.
going on dates, and that's why he's back on the app.
Or they just don't actually want a relationship.
They don't want to relate. That's the
misrepresenting what they're looking for.
Yes.
And so anyway, the point, his point was, my friend's point was that you're going to get a negative correlation with a bunch of the illegible traits, like whatever, kindness and whatever other traits that you...
No, yeah, not just... I mean, and these aren't like magnanimous things that like no one cares about. These are things that people actually... Yeah, for example, kindness, I think, is like overstated because what is being... I mean, I don't think that a lot of women care. I mean, people care that their partners aren't sociopaths, but like, I do think it's relatively... It's a relatively not valued trait to be kind in some like global
Universal
altruistic
sense.
way.
Yeah.
But things like, yeah, I mean, you said sense of humor, but at least that you can like convey in some ways using like prompts and things like that on dating apps.
But I'm saying if you're filtering, so you're not even...
Yeah, if
you
you're
can't-
filtering, yes.
Right? There could be lots, like... You're still maybe choosing for sense of humor based on the filter that you've done, but you're not even seeing the guys.
Yeah. And this is why guys are exaggerating. I mean, look, the I'm a hinge 5'11" or a hinge 6 or whatever, that is a real thing because men are like, look, this is a dumb system that's not working for anyone, and of course they do the unethical thing of like lying then and then catfishing someone on a date. But now, even though that solves sort of like the market failure, it's bad because it sends a bad individual signal about people who lie. Right. And so I think it's a pretty bad system. I would think that in general, as we get better at getting richer sources, I mean, there's a trade-off between like privacy and getting good matches. I really think that like if what you're willing to put out there is like as much as you're willing to put out there for tons of strangers to see, like that data is not going to result in very predictive things. Like you should be creative. Like I think there are ways to be creative and signal like things that only very specific people will get. Like I think people can put effort into all of that stuff, but I think the incentives there are bad enough that it makes sense to look at other channels, right?
Well, but also if you are, and you should just consider like, am I the type of person who should be on the apps at all? Like if you are somebody like me where you already have an interest that is more common among men than among women, why don't you just go to in-person events that focus on people with that interest? Because you're going to be just having a great sex ratio and you're going to have a, and not.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't.
Not
but,
everybody has
but
that.
But it is
I'm
true.
saying
Most
if you
people don't
do
have that even.
But if you do have that, I'm just saying, like, there's Jacob Falkovich had a tweet about like how weirdos should date versus how normies should date, and like the failure mode, basically, where he's like, if you're a weirdo, dating can be very easy for you because you have a small pool, but you're also highly valued within that pool, and you should date that way. If you're a normie, you get the benefit that you can match with a lot of different people, and you have a wider like choice of selection, and you're attractive to more people too. But if you're one or the other, you're gonna waste time if you try to date like you're the other type, which I think sounds about right. But that being said, if you're a weirdo in a subculture that's dominated by your sex, I don't see how it helps, right?
Yeah, which is like
if
I
you're
mean,
a gamer, that's
not just a gamer. I mean, like, yeah, if you do martial arts or like you do even, I mean, I did improv for a while. It's not, I mean, it seems like something that would attract more women. It's still very male dominated, right? And then you go to the other end. I mean, yes, you have dudes going to yoga classes. I don't believe for a second that they're interested in yoga.
I mean, some of them are, but also, like, I don't think women. Yeah, I could be wrong. I don't think women
cooking classes. Please, you're voluntarily going to a cooking class as a man. I sound like Andrew Tate.
Also, if you are voluntarily, yeah,
Andrew
Tate has a tweet where
he's
like, it's so good. He's like, imagine being a man and liking cooking, not fighting, not climbing, not making money, cooking, fucking bitch or something like that. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
I will say Andrew Tate has very few pearls of wisdom, but this might be something that hits a little bit deeper.
That's not true. Women love men. That's not true. Girls who go on a date where he makes them dinner, they're like, oh, he made me dinner, and they make a huge deal of it. Women do like that.
Oh, I believe women like that. I just don't understand how you can find that so like stimulating as a man, as an activity. That I don't even mean like, oh, those guys are losers or they don't get the. I think they do well, like just like guys who dance. I don't understand how one could be into that.
But that's true. That's like, that's not
true
even
with anything.
Based on sex. It's just true in general. Like, obviously, at the highest levels, men seem to do well in cooking. I mean, chefs are all
because
male.
at that level, I think we were talking about it like, with Eric the other day, where it becomes more of a performance. The goal you have to optimize.
It's just about ambition.
Yeah, I mean, anytime where there's like
lifestyle stuff.
What?
Like lifestyle stuff too. Like, there's probably just a higher percentage of men who are willing to do the work, like late night working.
Oh, I see. Lifestyle off a chef or something.
Lifestyle of a chef is terrible.
Yeah, that's true. I never thought of that. I was just thinking in terms of like, it seems like anytime there is something that can be formulaic and kind of you have like finer grained divisions between the 99th percentile and the 99.5 and 99.9. Men tend to really want to do things where you're really optimizing hard across one variable. And I think, I don't know, I haven't thought about this super deeply, but it at least vibes based kind of fits with the male strategy of high risk, high reward, where it's like
it's kind of like trying to make yourself into a weirdo, right? It's like being hyper successful at one single thing and not worrying so much about the rest is sort of the same weirdo dating. Like, somebody's gonna think that's super, super high status and love it. And like I had a friend who, on a much, much lighter version of trying to make yourself a weirdo, like grew a mustache for the apps. Because he was like, some girls fucking love mustaches. Most girls, it's a negative, but they're like 10% or 5% of girls that really like mustaches are going to be like actually willing to. Like,
I don't know any girls that like mustaches.
I don't
standalone mustaches. All right.
I think we're not in like hipster enough.
Maybe.
Communities to.
But then it's like, do you want to date one of those women? Anyway.
But going back to the sex differences thing, and this is a little bit of a different topic, but I wanted to quickly talk about like, so when it comes to the biggest sex difference, which is pregnancy and child rearing.
Sorry, before we go there, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
One way to like see if we have the right intuition about this is I want to ask some of my gay friends, like in the gay community, are people talking about how frustrated they are with dating? Or are they kind of like more, and I mean people who are looking for long-term relationships. So maybe I'll ask one of my friends if he thinks that, but the problem is I think with men that they're like, if they're having lots of casual sex and not in a fulfilled relationship, my sense is that men are, that might not be optimal even for a man, but like for a man that's like better than that position would be for a woman, right? So maybe.
But also, like, yes, everybody's gonna be frustrated until they meet somebody that they really, really
Mm-hmm.
like. That's it's not that you shouldn't be frustrated. I think it is just inherently frustrating, especially if you're making a real effort and you're like putting in the hours of making time for dates and stuff. I think it's natural to be frustrated.
And if you're
Whether
on,
it's like it's one thing to be frustrated and be like, oh, I'm spending so much time on this and I have like anybody can be frustrated. It's more about, are you painting the entire opposite sex as like demons here to keep you down and make your life hellish?
and for most middle class people who are buying a house, I think it works really well because like unless you cross a threshold, at most you're going to buy 2 houses, 3 houses. At most, you're going to have long-term relations
Three
with
houses.
2 people, 3 people, and so it makes sense that like you would vet a lot and do a lot of due diligence,
Yes.
right? It's like it's a good thing that
Yeah.
that's. I think this is what we both push back against some of the more trad fertility crowd that seems to be so enthusiastic about suggesting that people pair up super early, and I think that's misguided, right? I think we can think long and hard about how we can incentivize fertility, and I'm like open to doing that, but I think we should be careful that at the end of the day, like subjective well-being is something we don't have. We don't have a very good handle on that, but we should expect that if you make it much harder for people to either split up or you push people too hard in their 20s to get married, I don't know that that's such a good thing. But anyway, that's a separate debate.
No, exactly. I mean, yeah. And when I was on Alex's pod, we talked about the optimal rate of divorce thing that I wrote, which is just the idea that like a zero divorce rate would mean that there were a ton of people staying in unproductive unions or potentially abusive or much worse type of unions or for sure.
Yeah, like Iran has
stuff, right? So,
has a 0% homosexuality rate, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds right.
I don't want to. Yeah.
No, but and just that. Yeah, I mean, if you get married really young and have kids really young, the cost of finding a new partner or whatever just go up, right? Like if in my case, I'm divorced. I didn't have kids. It was a difficult thing to go through, but it's not like. It's not anything compared to what people who have kids with somebody have to deal with, where they're connected to them forever. And like, if you make that decision at 22, it's just, it works out sometimes. I mean, my parents had me young and they're together and they've had a great long-term relationship, marriage. But yeah, I do get a little nervous about suggesting that. I'm like, yes, it's great to have more time to have kids, especially if you want to have a larger family, but there's I mean, we have data on this too. The percentage of people who divorce within 5 years is much higher for younger couples than it is for people.
I think
who
where
pair
it
up
does come from, it's not that I don't get this intuition, but it's something like, look, if you're at the right tails of anything, right, whether as a man or a woman, like if you're smart, productive to a degree that's generally unusual by any metric. So at some point, it becomes rational for you to prioritize, self-exploration, intellectual exploration, productivity, and, delay things till you later find the optimal person, if there is a person, that kind of attitude. And I think a lot of the people that we just criticized are saying, well, that's fine for a very small minority of people, but the vast majority of people, there's not that much delta between, like, first and second optimal match, and in general people want to like have a good family, and what we need to focus on instead is like good norms of kind of having social norms such that cheating is like looked down less favorably. People are able to leave with less ease, which is where I think they go a little bit wrong. But in general, they're saying, look, we should like make the social norms as if the average person is incentivized to pair up early, and that's sort of like a vehicle for stability in the
reason I have a problem with this is like I do think that lots of people can make relationships work whether they're like soulmates or not. I think you can have lots of productive unions like that, and cultures with arranged marriage make this abundantly clear because they don't seem to have significantly. It's unclear whether they have like worse happiness in their marriages long term, right? But the big difference with arranged marriage is that it is through a mutual extended family structure where the person is being selected, not just by the 20-year-old.
Yes, and like I think people's obsession with
And I don't want that because I like to have my own personal autonomy to
Correct.
choose my partner.
And
however, if you're choosing somebody at 20, you probably should be listening to what your
yes,
parents
absolutely.
and grandparents are saying.
And I think people don't, and this is where folks are too dismissive of kind of it's not that the Western world and the Eastern world, so to speak, there are trade-offs, right? I'm not saying like everything is better in one system, but it is true that this arranged marriage system and families staying together longer term, that stability is achieved by compromising something. And it's compromising the individual and its aspirations and all of that. Now, and if we have that norm, there's no way you can get that norm just for the middle of the distribution, and it won't affect what you see on the tails. Like the reason in the US you get so much innovation, I don't think you would have that in a more conformist culture. So we have to make these choices as cultures as to how conformist we want people to be. So what is aspirational? Being conformist or being an outlier? In America,
Right.
being an outlier is aspirational. That means median outcomes will probably be not as good, but we get great outcomes on the right tails that have spillovers.
It's also that like with longer lifespans and more assisted reproductive technology, you would expect that the optimal age of pairing up would be higher now than it used to be, right? So
yeah.
like people talk a lot about the fact that there's just like more opportunity costs, people have more options and all of that stuff. They don't need to be in a partnership. They don't need to have kids in order to be self-sufficient and all of that, which is part of it. But I also think it's just like, yeah, people have longer times with their partner and they spend more time with them. They expect them to be a friend and more than just a co-parent or whatever.
Yeah, our lifespans are getting longer, but I think even more, our health spans are getting longer. And I think that means that, rationally what you'd expect or your prior should be every stage of life gets like extended somewhat. So that's why the famous like extended adolescence or something like that. And similarly, people are pairing up a little bit later. And frankly, if you look at the bottleneck in fertility, it's not that, 40-year-old women can, and 45-year-old women even can bring fetuses to term. I said that weird, but what they can't, but their eggs are not fresh, right? The eggs are the bottleneck, and the age of the eggs are the bottleneck. So you have to kind of, that's why hence
eggs
IVF.
Have salmonella.
Okay.
One other thing I wanted to bring up before we move on
was
the thing about heterogeneous preferences again, which we've touched on, but I see, on the male side of this online, there's a lot of discussion about women are hypergamous. They want which essentially means that women want to date someone who's like above them in class or in whatever way. Right?
Sorry, can I just say something that I've always wanted to say to everyone who likes to say this? This is not true. This cannot be true. Like it can't be that literally all the women are dating up. That means like all men are higher status than women. Like how does that make sense?
So the Evo Bio thing.
I know that one. No, I know in a polygamous society.
Yes, but their point is that that's how women,
their heuristics work like that.
Yeah, and so then what they really mean is that because men relative to women care a little bit more about physical attraction, that women who are otherwise sort of like lower than some man will, that's the only way it can really make sense, right? That it's like women who are like attractive
so that's
women,
what I mean. I mean like
attractive women from a lower class or something. And this used to be more true. Like, I think you did used to see more like businessmen dating their secretaries and marrying their secretaries, and like class mobility for women going in that direction. But I don't think that like the data I don't think is even true for that anymore. It's like
I think Scott Alexander did something to dispel some of the myths around this, which I frankly I shouldn't opine on because I didn't read its piece properly.
I remember reading it a couple years ago, but basically he did a bunch of investigation into this, and it's like it's very unlikely that you're going to date someone who's like wildly different in attractiveness and wildly different in class
any
and wealth
trait,
than you.
frankly, yeah.
So like you don't need to worry so much about whether you're going to get someone who's attractive enough or wealthy enough. It's like that's kind of how people tend to pair up.
Yeah, and
there's more to it, obviously.
This hypergamy stuff, like the reason it's that the real way to think about status, because status is a relative thing. Status is relative to other people in your. If you're looking at mating status, it's status relative to other men, and for men that might be more fungible. So there might be more things that go into the equation. For women, it might be more, univariate.
I think I think women are more fungible.
No, I meant
actually.
like when a man looks at a woman, it's hard to funge for her whether she's good looking or not. Like if she's smart instead of good looking, that probably doesn't raise her status that much. Whereas for men, it's more fungible.
It seems like, they have a bar on attractiveness and then it's fungible, whereas women are a little bit more, maybe women have a bar on having his life together, having a job, and then it's a little bit more fungible. So maybe it's more actually symmetric than I've thought in the past. But
it does seem like actually it's more that they just are more okay with fungibility in general. So for example, you will see successful women with hot, I mean, it doesn't happen often, but like you'll see not good looking successful women often with hot, young, dumb as shit guys, right? That's do you not think that's true?
I don't see that very often.
Really? Okay.
I think you see that very rarely because of there's some truth to the stuff these guys are saying. But I wanted to bring up the heterogeneity thing because it's just this idea that like women are hypergamous, whatever, they want to date up. And Malcolm Collins has many times been like, obviously everybody wants to date up. We all want to date someone better than us. We'll date the best person that likes us. But importantly, it's not like everyone agrees on who the most desirable person is. Like we all have friends. Like most people don't share. Most people wouldn't date any of their friends' partners. That's maybe that's a little extreme, but you might think their partner's great for them and be like, I wouldn't date them.
Yeah.
Right?
So I mean, I guess
it's not so simple as like dating up or down. It's like, luckily we do have truly different preferences where you can get into relationships where both people feel like they're getting somebody way better than they could have ever imagined getting. And they feel extremely lucky on both sides.
I think even in this domain, it's funny how many problems boil down to people have the wrong economic intuitions about how this works. So, for example, it's not even economic intuition. It's just like a basic statistical thing where if people love talking about mate value, right? That's one thing from evolutionary biology that has penetrated pop culture in general, or at least internet pop culture. And people will talk about mate value as if there's some agreed upon, index of mate value that has fixed weights on every attribute, right? The point is it's a two-sided marketplace with different preferences. Like that's why I said it's like you can't just think of it like an equity market. You're not literally buying a stock where it's the thing you care about is you care about one thing, which is the price, and then you can, you can talk about that. And here it's what's true is that for your preferences, you can create a, you can graph the mate value of different people and pick ones that are high. And yes, it's true that if you do that, if you sum that across all the preferences of all the women, some men will be on top. But those men are on top because they are appealing to a larger set of women, but it's still not even close to the majority of women for each type of man, right?
Yeah.
So that's I think it's kind of like thinking about IQ. It's like, yes, it's the most like predictive thing we have, but it's in an individual case, it's not that predictive. Does that make sense?
And so this is far more true when we're talking about like overall mate value, but even when you're just talking about physical attractiveness, this is true. Like people have types, right? People disagree about whether somebody's hot. This happens all the time, especially with women. I don't know if it happens to the same degree with men, but like with groups of girls, one of them will be like, I love that tattooed bald guy over there, and then the other women are like, oh, that's not my type. I like this like skinny whatever. Like people have different types, and actually there's survey data that suggests that people think
women like men with massive dongs. Isn't there survey data on this? Sorry.
that people overrate their partner's physical attractiveness relative to how other people rate them on average. So people typically pair up with somebody who's their type, where they think they're
Is
hotter.
that true? Like before, is that only true? Are they measuring that before as well? Because like I would like to see if.
I don't know, because like I saw somebody doing some kind of stretching Evo bio explanations where they're like, well, it's because it's adaptive to think your partner is better looking than they are because you do a better job of mate guarding them. And I'm like, I don't find that very convincing. I think it is what I'm saying. I think it's that if you, like, let's say some woman is more your type. Like, let's say on a market rate, people would rate her as a 7. You think she's an 8.5. You're going to be more interested in her than like the average guy, and you're going to try hard. Like, it's just, you would expect that things would filter out that way, that people will end up with people that they think are better looking than most people think they are.
Except
not always.
This is the problem, which is that I think this is a problem that we can see in our like information ecosystem too, where there's two ways of aggregating information, right? You like the simple model of the world is everyone has preferences, and then we can aggregate preferences of people, and then we know some composite measure. But the problem is that people are forming their preferences based on what they perceive to be the aggregate. So for example, like men are thinking in their while shaping their preferences, how attractive would other men find this woman, right? Even if they in a sexual way find one thing attractive, the status implication of that, it's priced into their preferences, and it's hard to like delineate that from their actual preference. And that's kind of what's happening in a lot of these cases, like, I mean, including with when women are judging men, right?
I think that's true. And I think like the, how the type of career that your boyfriend or whatever has is that can be something women are discriminating on, partly because they're like, how is this going to look to my friends or my internal judgment or whatever. But I mean, I'm just saying on average, you should expect that people think their partner is hotter than other people think they are. I think that makes sense.
Yeah,
and survey results seem to bear it out. But the last thing I was going to talk about, which is, like I said, slightly different topic, but
Huberman? Are we talking about Huberman yet? No?
Oh, I was just going to make one more thing. Sure. Because remember I brought something up earlier and then... Yeah. Anyway, so I just wanted to quickly talk about what I think is like the most obvious and most impactful sex difference, which is that women get pregnant and men don't, right? So there's this like, I think that I used to have this more, and a lot of women have this relationship with like ahead of time kind of being annoyed about the fact that you're going to have this difficulty that the male is not going to have, whoever you partner with, if you want to have kids. And you're going to have to go through this thing. You're going to have to put in this effort, which is for the both of you. And that's like fundamentally unfair in some way. And I just wanted to touch on it because it's like, yes, I totally understand why somebody would feel that way. And I have felt that way. But I don't know. I guess I just think like I think it's like spending time thinking about how it's unfair to you seems like a very unproductive way to think about things. And a healthier thing is to think about like, listen, I have certain goals. I want to partner with somebody who can help me achieve those goals. Part of those goals need to be achieved by me physically doing this labor and pregnancy. And there's other physical things that women have over men. We live 6 years longer. And not just, I don't know.
I think it is true that, what I will give women is that a bunch of the physical stuff that men had to endure, like going to war, that's been attenuated for most men. So most men aren't going to fucking war, and most men aren't the sole breadwinners either. So
or working in the coal mine
and doing something super dangerous, right? So there is a way in which the average exposure and men, I love it when men complain about like the extra seats on the Titanic or whatever, the lifeboat on a Titanic type of situation. Like those situations are exceedingly rare, and in fact in most of the other physical domains we have equalized in general the safety level. A lot of the reasons men die more as kind of men killing each other or
No, but
men committing
still
suicide.
do die more at work.
No,
It's
and
just it's been attenuated in a way that you're right. The physical thing of pregnancy has not been attenuated to the same degree that
Correct.
the physical things men used to have to do have been attenuated in
yeah,
our
and,
modern
and the
society.
painful. I mean, the how bad pregnancy could be. The tales of it, to be fair, have been attenuated, right? It's just that there are no good. Like most women aren't immune from like the sizable sacrifice that it entails. Now, I think there are other things, right, in other domains, like psychologically, where, and I think women were often talking about this. It makes sense that they're concerned about this because they belong to a specific socioeconomic class. But if you look at, okay, what is more embarrassing, or who is way more anxious about not being a loser, right, in their career or something. Like, it is a reasonable outcome for a woman to make nothing, so social status wise, even today. Men get far more flack for that.
Yeah,
So-
I always talk about this. There's like basically no female losers. No one ever no one ever calls a woman a loser. And I do think this like goes deep into our evolved natures of how we think about
Yeah, I mean,
sexes.
have you ever spoken to I've been unemployed before. I have friends who've gone through that process. It's a deeply troubling process for more reasons I'm intuiting, obviously, than just like the money, because most of these people aren't like struggling for money. It's that the idea that you're contributing to the world is a part of how your status is ascertained. Now,
And that's true for lots of women too. Like
It's totally-
when I was unemployed, it was extremely like not by choice. I mean, I'm unemployed by choice. But when I was unemployed, not by choice, it was extremely troubling for me. But I was like ambitious and trying to do something.
but the thing is, right, people are making the same category error, or maybe it's not a category error that we talked about earlier, which is these women, they're not realizing that they are also a very unusual, this is something you mentioned in a different context on Alex Kashuda's podcast. The right variable there is not men or women, it's that you're a high achieving woman, right? If you're super ambitious, and then
But that's true for men too. Super ambitious men get more anxious than median.
no, it's
Yeah,
true.
that's true.
It's true. But I'm saying that
The median versus median, or the same percentile versus
but
same
like
percentile.
women
Yeah.
are often looking at how the median couple might negotiate some of these differences, but there's no reason to think that the median statistic is what is likely to happen if you find an idiosyncratic match, right? And it is hard for people who are at the tails of anything to find matches. I'll give them that, but I think worrying about that in average terms is
if
stupid.
you're a really ambitious, career-focused woman, the type of men who are going to be attracted to you are not going to want you to be. They're into that kind of woman. They're not going to be trying to get you to give up your career for them. As likely, I mean, the Emily Gould essay, I guess, is like kind of an interesting version of this, which was she almost divorced her husband. They were both writers, and she felt very competitive with him because he was further along in his career.
But it was
older,
like
more
totally her
successful.
fault, right?
It was her fault. Yeah. No, she was doing more of the childcare because they discussed it and they both rationally decided that he was making a lot more money and he should focus on his.
It's like the movie Anatomy of a Fall. I don't know if people watched it, but
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. We can
it's a good
move on to
because
that.
even in that the woman who was the more ambitious or who had more success in her career, she was not making him do the things that he was putting himself through. She was like, let's get help. Let's I'm pretty sure I'm right. You're talking about a different movie. You're talking about Force Majeure.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm talking about Anatomy of a
Yes,
Fall,
exactly
which I think
like
is
that.
I guess a more mainstream movie. But I felt like she was totally reasonable in saying, dude, if you want to write more, we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
We came here to the chalet so you could write more, and now you want to homeschool your kid. That's on you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think similarly, this Emily Gold woman, her husband, you told me, was very supportive in saying, do what you have to do, and we'll find ways around it.
No,
right?
and she's very vulnerable in the essay, and she admits she's like, guess what? When he didn't get time to write because there was kid stuff going on, he'd stay up till 2 a.m. writing in the closet den or whatever, and she's like, I'm just also not willing to do that.
This is something that Jordan Peterson, the pre-crazy version, got right, which is that this is an important sex difference is what we mentioned earlier, is the willingness for men even as they get older to want to be at the very top sliver of something.
Mm-hmm. Well, for the men, again, this is not the median man. The median man
yes,
is
the
just
median man's not doing this,
have
right?
a normal job and provide income and raise a family with someone nice and,
have a little bit of sexy time.
Yeah, no, sorry. I thought, but yeah, no, the Anatomy of a Fall, that's the movie, right?
Yeah.
They really do remind me of the Emily Gould, but gender reversed.
Yeah.
But gosh, I wish I could remember her monologue. It's so good.
So we're trying to do a segment where we don't have a special name for it. We're just gonna do. Sometimes we might do like online gossip type stuff that's just interesting to us, interesting from like an anthropological perspective. And I don't want to undersell this because I think this is something that so many people that we agree with on a bunch of other things have been getting so wrong. I mean, I saw recently, so we're talking about the man Andrew Huberman, right? And I hope you know who Andrew Huberman is. If not, then go and find out what happened, but I'm not going to go through it. But basically, he's a podcaster and a neuroscientist, and he was accused by 5 women. It was a story that was in New York Magazine or something, right? NY Mag. And he was found to be like 5-timing 5 different women.
No, and some of the passages in the article are so crazy. It's like he was literally like texting one, then meeting up with the other one, having sex with her, right after messaging another one saying he loved her so much, then going to get caught. It was frankly impressive to pull off, but very disturbing about what it says about the person. And anyway, there was like a big Twitter blow up around this.
Should I explain my reaction and say how I was wrong?
Yes.
So there were people that we interacted with. I'm not on Twitter now, but at the time I was, and there were people that we interacted with on Twitter that had sort of said something about the story, and my instinctive reaction was one of annoyance, and I was like, oh, it's a hit piece on this Andrew Huberman guy who I'm not really a fan. I find him quite like at least vanilla and not enjoyable to listen to at all. And
he thinks he's too much of a square.
He is too much of a square. Or, well, not anymore. But anyway. So we thought. Yeah. So I wasn't feeling defensive of Huberman per se, but this kind of pattern match to my anti-woke instinct of how does this
anti-cancel culture?
Anti-cancel culture, yeah, that's right. It's like I was like, how does this even if he was sleeping with 5 women, how does this kind of reflect on the stuff he's doing? And that was sort of my instinctive response. And I was coming in from a slightly different perspective, which might still be valid. It's that is this the type of journalism that even if it was very well written, like to what end, right? What was the newsworthiness and the impact of it, right? And I think I might be even wrong on that count, because I think that Huberman has a large audience, so this is clearly not someone with minimal influence. So let me give you the bottom line. Go on.
And he's a personality figure, right? Like, yes, he's presenting science and interviewing researchers, but part of the appeal of him was that he's this guy that's kind of like a role model figure, got his shit together, which I would have perceived to include mental health in a stable enough place that you're not desiring to 5-time girlfriends.
So you made that argument, and then I was like, look, that's a little bit of a stretch. Like, you can say that about any job. Mm-hmm. And let's leave all of that aside. And you can judge for yourself, how right or wrong I was. But I think the bottom line here is that
it's fascinating.
And what changed my mind was I had this perspective, right? And then I was like, but it seems even then I was like, it's unlikely that 5 of these women are making it up. Like it's they might be exaggerating, right? Like it's not. My prior wasn't, oh, he's totally being framed. But then I watched one of Peter Tia was interviewing him. We'll put it in the show notes. You guys can go watch for yourselves. It's fascinating. And you want to watch that interview as if you were being a good Bayesian, trying to map what you've read about him and the stuff he's been up to with how he's acting. And if you look at it from that perspective, it took me a half hour, and I've never been so convinced I was so wrong, right? You want to say, do you remember kind of the
just,
salient parts of that?
He was talking about his troubled youth, and there was like a pervasive defensiveness where every time he would talk about why he got sent to some reformatory school or why he was disciplined in some way, he'd be like, obviously I wasn't being violent or doing drugs or anything like that.
He was like, everyone there was being, there for drugs or violence, but I was just there for like truancy. And I was like,
yeah, it just didn't make sense. So that was one thing. And then we recently watched a more current interview.
And I know this is controversial, but he also comes from a broken home, and he alluded to his dad being a not very good person. Now, most people look at that piece of evidence and go, oh, that just makes it more, that means he's probably a good guy. No, I mean, both genetically and environmentally, it raises the risk that you are someone totally sociopathic. And I think not, in his case, sociopathic, because he'd also started this violent behavior and this sort of abnormalcy fairly early on.
No, he was just truancy. It was just
truancy. But and he was so it was way too defensive. And then there were a couple of things where I think Peter Attia was talking about something very personal, right? Like the death of someone, or it was a heavy moment. And something I saw which I wouldn't have picked up if I wasn't looking for it, the way Andrew Huberman responded to that, it wasn't like mean or rude. It was like clearly that he wasn't empathizing with the gravity of what the other person was saying.
It might have been his own sad story, but either way,
yes, it might have been his own sad story.
The story. Yeah, it was just very.
Oh yeah, he was saying, a couple of people killed themselves when they were there, and just
anyway.
The way. And he was like, oh yeah, anyway, yeah. It's again, I think.
But so we watched this more recent interview of him post the social media
with James Hollis.
Yes, and for people who aren't online, like the size of the blow up, it lasted days. It was just like so insane. And so he has this Jungian psychoanalyst on, and they're talking about mental health and the purpose of psychoanalysis and finding yourself and living your life fully. And Huberman turns to him and he's like, so what is it? Is it, is there something you can hope for? Is it just a 15-minute in the morning, 15-minute in the evening, 30 minutes for journaling, chipping away at the mental health? And you're just like, you couldn't even imagine someone who has more deeply misunderstood the...
He's so misunderstood. I mean, I think both. So what happened is he James Hollis responds saying, actually, literally, I don't know what the word, it's like, it literally means listening to your soul. It means like, these are things of, how to do it, when to do it, stuff you should, there literally can't be a formula because you have to be in tune with yourself, right? Which is, it sounds new agey, but it is just a fact.
Like, right.
Huberman's like, right, but if you were to do it on Monday, how many minutes should
then he's like, okay, so weekly I do this, quarterly I do this, yearly. Anyway, it's just hilarious. But then he also kept alluding, what was so interesting was like, they're talking about mental health. He's talking about his experiences with meditation and whatever. And he's talking about social media being difficult, all while failing to like explicitly say anything, but he's hinting at...
No, he was very angry. I mean, he was, each time the person would, James would explain something, he would relate it back to make a snide comment about how he was fucked over. And it was so defensive and unnecessary, right? And
none of it was about personal growth. It wasn't like he was like,
none of it was personal growth.
I've had some periods to learn from recently. It was all about, you got to shut off the social media.
Yeah, they're toxic people. They're toxic people out to get you. That was all he was saying.
It was so amazing to see somebody who, like, we all know his life is like a trash fire, acting as though he like I'm on top of it with my 2 meditations a day. And it's
But
like,
this
dude,
is
that's
the
not
problem.
the point.
But this is, I think this gets to, this interview for me more than I don't give a fuck if he slept with 5 women or not. It gets to the heart of what is wrong with all of these people, which is that they have taken things that are ingredients to live a good life, one ingredient of a good life, and they're optimizing for it so hard that the life is not even close to good. Like
Right.
the way he's talking about meditation, Sam Harris would be like, I'm sure he must be so appalled that he explained this to him for 3 hours and he still didn't get it. He's like, so I try to get a couple of meditations in, 10 minutes of meditation in the morning. And it's like, that's just antithetical to the project of meditation
Yeah.
itself. And it's all, he's trying to get everything down to a formula that his audience will consume, and his audience wants that. And just, I don't want to like look down on people who were into self-improvement. I think that's a great thing. I'm not like looking down on the whole culture of like Reddit and self-improvement. I'm on Reddit a lot. I've done nootropics, right? I'm not against any of these things, but like making your life hell so you can optimize for one of these things is dumb. No woman would want to be with you who's like reasonably interesting.
Well, obviously not. He's 50 and single, so lots of women would
Want to
like
be with, I mean,
to be
they-
with him. Would like to be
with an idea of him
Yeah.
that doesn't exist.
what Huberman could have represented. But anyway,
And by the way, just so we know, this is not. I don't want to come across as ripping on Huberman because he's a ripped, good-looking guy. I promise you, I am not jealous of Andrew Huberman. I even defended him on Twitter when this came out, and then I was like, this is and people like Sarah Hayter, who I have enormous respect for, are going on Substack defending this guy, saying stuff which are complete non sequiturs. Like, I think, Rob Henderson did this, which is like, I think this is a really dumb response, which
Rob
is,
Henderson did something where he was like, I mean, what do you expect?
what do you expect? He's a famous
jacked
guy.
Of
He would
course he's-
obviously sleep with five. I'm like,
no, I
No.
don't think so. A lot of successful men like to have.
by the way, he
healthy,
wasn't
happy
just cheating.
relationships.
He wasn't like
Wait, but also,
ambiguous with 5 women, right? You said he had frozen embryos with one of them. Like, he was in a serious relationship.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, but also like, isn't Rob Henderson married with kids and he's a famous It's like, I don't even understand the
what is
logic
this, like-
there. I'm like, are you telling us you cheat on your wife? Or, like,
No, I think he was.
obviously
I think he
not,
was saying.
but-
He was saying like, "What do you expect from a 40-year-old single successful man or something?" And it's like, okay, fine, we can blame these women for not being good Bayesians, okay? But that is, no one cares. There are lots of bad judges of character, right?
No, there's definitely some truth to that. Susie Weiss had a couple of very funny tweets about, or I can't remember if it was tweets or if she wrote a piece about it, but just about how like these women were successful women in their 40s and somehow they didn't notice that their boyfriend had 4 other girlfriends.
Yeah.
Which like obviously
I have no problem,
They were
yeah.
into it. They were into the fact that they wanted to date a famous, they wanted to be the girl that the type of guy like Huberman would be into, and these were women who were on Raya and that kind of thing, and like. Yeah, they were probably status conscious and they probably let a lot of stuff slip through the cracks because they didn't want to think about it because they wanted it to be true. that
By the
they
way, I
were
have
dating
no
Andrew
problem
Huberman.
with people shitting on these women, or even I do think they're not like, obviously those women aren't people that reasonably smart guys would want to date either. Like,
No,
given
I think they are though. I think that's the thing. I think they are the type of women that like
Really?
they were all like
They have-
reasonably successful kind of
yeah,
like,
but they're bad judges of
mature
character. I mean,
women.
they're
I don't even think. I think it's more complicated than that. I don't think it's that they're like objectively in all settings bad judges of character. I think it's that. I mean, this is the reason why people get anxious about famous people dating fans or famous people dating people where there's like a quote unquote power imbalance. Is that it's easy. It's easier to like look past some things because they really wanted to be the girl that's dating Andrew Huberman. Like it's just
and
it's not
that's
that it's
not a
morally,
good thing. I mean,
No,
that's
it's
something
not.
you
It's
should
not.
stay away from. But
it's status seeking behavior most likely that
yes.
could any like yes, of course somebody could just be totally oblivious, but
the whole
given-
point is not to like. My problem is not you should never talk about these women. I'm saying the fact that all these public personalities are dunking on these women instead of doing
of
the
the
thing
guy.
that's more useful here, which
Also-
also has a more public. It's like
Yeah.
something of public interest. No one cares that these women are dumb. Like, people care that Andrew Huberman is a piece of shit and he is peddling. And then you had people also come up with things that he has misrepresented. Now, none of his like scientific misrepresentations seem like that big a deal, but given they're all things that have, low effect sizes, which but have like very little downside. But all this is to say, this is not a normal person with a normal psychological makeup who has any judgment on what a good life is. And
no,
what
and it does change. Like the fact that he's this kind of person does change how you think about who he has on and what his incentives are and what his motivations are, I think. But anyway, the clip of him asking how you can chip away at your mental health was one of the funniest things.
He said, so, 10 minutes meditation, 15 minutes yoga, getting the journaling in, chipping away.
Do we ever get to
relax? Just tells you all you need to know about his life.
Anyway, should we close it?
Yeah, I'm really excited talking about Huberman. I didn't realize I was so passionate about
There's
this.
so much content to mine there. But yeah, thanks for listening, and
All right.
we'll be back next week.
Bye.
Bye.